EVA-2 took Young and Duke up the side of Stone Mountain, hundreds of feet above the Cayley Plains. And the main picture, you can see Duke standing at the rover. And I'm not sure if you can tell this, but everything beyond the rover there is hundreds of feet below where the rover is. It's a pretty steep drop, not a cliff, but a pretty steep slope going down to that plain. In fact, John Young at one point looked down onto the plain, looked down those slopes, and thought to himself, "You may have bit off more than you can chew," because he knew it was going to be kind of interesting, shall we say, driving downhill, and he had some apprehension about whether the rover would handle it well. Of course it did, because that rover was an amazing machine, and in fact he felt that they could have gone to some even more rugged places than they actually were allowed to go. The inset just shows a really neat view from the rover's television camera of Young and Duke on Stone Mountain. Now here again, looking for volcanic rocks, but a different kind than the ones that they had planned to find down on the plains. But again, they found nothing but breccias. So their search for a volcanic history here at the Descartes Highlands was so far being frustrated. Well, EVA-3 took them to North Ray Crater, and the top image is a view from the television camera on the rover, and you can see North Ray Crater fills most of the frame. It starts a little bit beyond the left edge of the picture and continues almost to the right edge of the picture. At the very right edge of the frame, you see kind of a half of a dark shape that disappears off the right side of the picture. That is something we will learn more about in a minute. But I also want to call your attention to the figures of Young and Duke themselves that are visible just left of center, standing not at the rim but near the rim. Young started to approach the rim but felt that it was too big a slope to walk to the rim safely. He wanted to be able to see down into the bottom of the crater, but he was afraid he might not get back up. Well, that big black shape on the right turned out to be a very big rock. And let's take a look at the video of Young and Duke approaching that rock, which I've compressed somewhat in time. You see them running off towards the rock. You can't tell how big it is yet. Now here they're quite a bit closer. And they're getting closer and closer. And it looks big, but not amazingly big. But look now. Look at the size of that rock, Charlie says. The closer I get to it, the bigger it is. And, it was a big rock. It was the size of a house. And it had clearly come from the floor of North Ray Crater. It had been blasted out the bottom of North Ray Crater and was sitting there just a short distance away from the rim. And it, too, turned out to be a huge breccia. So right there was the nail in the coffin for the volcanic hypothesis of the Descartes Highlands. And, of course, Ken Mattingly in lunar orbit, just as Al Worden had done, was carrying out his own very complicated, very fully jammed flight plan of orbital observations and photography. And this is one of the pictures that Mattingly took with the high-powered cameras in the side of the service module. Just a spectacularly detailed view. And other cameras showed much higher resolution for much smaller pieces of moonscape, but this is a really nice example of what the wider field so-called mapping camera was able to do. Apollo 17, the very final Apollo mission, the final moon landing mission, lifted off on December 7th, 1972, and I should say that I was there as a 16-year-old space fanatic. I managed to get a VIP pass from my congressman and watched the launch, which took place at about midnight. and I was about 3.5 miles away at the VIP stands, and I'll tell you, it was like the sun coming up in the middle of the night, this amazing, beautiful golden light as this the last of the moon rockets left the Earth, with Gene Cernan, Ron Evans, and Jack Schmitt aboard. By the way, the mission patch that you see there was designed and rendered by my friend, space artist Bob McCall, who passed away recently. He was a wonderful guy, and he was a tremendously inspiring artist. And this patch shows the figure of the god Apollo looking off into the distance. The moon is at the top, but beyond that is Saturn, future destination for human beings in some far-flung decade or century from now. And beyond that, even another galaxy where humans will perhaps eventually go. So McCall was conveying the end of Apollo, but looking ahead, hopefully, to even greater adventures in space. And that certainly reflected the astronauts' attitude about Apollo 17. In fact, Cernan made a point of calling it the end of the beginning, not the end. Here are Gene Cernan and Jack Schmitt in their Lunar Module Challenger on the surface of the moon. Schmitt, as you know from reading the book, was one of the first handful of scientist astronauts selected by NASA in 1965 and became the first professional scientist to visit another world. As a geologist, of course, this was a perfect match for Schmitt, and they, in fact, chose a landing site even more complex than they might have had they not had the services of a professional geologist on board. Meanwhile, Ron Evans in the command module America would keep watch and conduct his own mission of exploration in lunar orbit for 3 days while Cernan and Schmitt were on the surface. And you can see in this photograph of America, in the side of the service module, you can see all of those cameras and other scientific instruments that are in that scientific instrument module. Here are the traverses for Apollo 17. Apollo 17 landed in a box canyon called the Taurus Littrow Valley, so named because the Taurus Mountains are all around the valley, and it is within shouting distance of the crater Littrow, so hence the name Taurus Littrow Valley. The floor of the valley is lava flows, and but a unusually dark lava, and the mountains, of course, this bright, assumingly older rock that is composed of that older rock type or several subtypes of that primordial crust that we've seen on the earlier missions. And these show the traverses, and if you notice the very long, several-mile traverse on EVA-2 extending to the lower left corner out to the crater Nansen, and over a kind of a landslide there that you see where they say Tortilla Flat. By the way, that landslide is probably the result of ejecta from the crater Tycho, very, very prominent feature in the southern part of the moon. That ejecta traveling thousands of miles through space and striking the South Massif and spilling ejecta and landslide material down onto the valley floor. And by picking up a sample of that, the geologists expected that they would get an age for the formation of Tycho, which turns out to be something like 100 million years ago.